Welcome to Tales from the Abyss, where the shadows whisper and the unknown beckons. Here, nightmares come to life and reality is never what it seems. Enter if you dare, but beware. Once you descend into the abyss, there's no turning back. Lena Morris had always been different. While others saw nothing but the veil of the present, Lena saw the spaces between, the flickering shadows that moved in the corners of her vision, the voices that whispered just beyond the edge of hearing. She was a medium, a person born with the rare ability to communicate with spirits from the other side. Some called her gift a blessing, others a curse. Her grandmother had been the first to recognize it. "You see them, don't you, child?" she had asked, her weathered hands tracing ancient symbols in the air like a forgotten language. Lena had been only 6 years old at the time, and she hadn't understood what her grandmother meant, but the chill in the room had been unmistakable. The sense of something otherworldly, watching, waiting. That was when Lena first realized she was different. As she grew older, the whispers became more frequent. She could hear them clearly now, spirit voices that were sometimes pleading, sometimes angry, always desperate to be heard. At first, Lena had tried to ignore them, afraid of what they might mean. But she couldn't stop herself. The spirits were drawn to her, seeking answers, seeking help. And for years, Lena had served as their messenger, guiding them toward peace, listening to their stories, and offering whatever comfort she could. But recently, things had begun to change. The spirits she encountered were no longer the familiar, benign ones she had come to understand. They were darker. Their voices were more insistent, more demanding. They clawed at the edges of her mind, sometimes so forcefully that it felt as though they were trying to pull her into their world. It was on a cold autumn night that Lena first encountered the force that would change everything. She had been called to an old house at the edge of town, an ancient, decaying building that had been abandoned for years. The townspeople whispered about it, calling it the House of the Damned. No one knew who had lived there or why it had been left to rot, but the air around it was thick with unease. For months, Lena had been receiving visions of the place, a dark presence looming over it, watching, waiting. As she stood in front of the decaying structure, the wind howled through the trees, sending the dry leaves skittering across the ground like ghosts themselves. The house loomed before her, its windows dark and empty, its silhouette jagged against the pale moonlight. Lena could feel the weight of something unnatural pressing against her, a cold that sank into her bones. She knew that this wasn't a normal haunting. There was something more to this place. Something malevolent, something ancient. With a deep breath, Lena stepped forward, her footsteps echoing on the gravel driveway. The door to the house was slightly ajar, creaking on its hinges as though beckoning her inside. She hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the threshold. Then, without another thought, she crossed the threshold. The instant she entered the house, the temperature dropped. The air felt thick, suffocating. She could hear the faint sound of something scratching, a low, almost relentless sound that seemed to come from the walls themselves. She closed her eyes, focusing on the spirits that might be trapped in the house. But there was nothing. Nothing but an overwhelming silence, a quiet that felt too oppressive, too unnatural. She moved further into the house, her heart pounding in her chest. The walls were lined with old, faded wallpaper, peeling away in places to reveal cracked plaster beneath. The furniture was covered in layers of dust and cobwebs, as though the house had been frozen in time. But it wasn't the state of the house that disturbed her. It was the feeling that something was watching her. Something. Waiting. Lena's breath caught in her throat as a whisper echoed in her mind. "Leave." She froze. The voice was distant, barely audible, but there was no mistaking the urgency. It was a voice she had heard before, a spirit trapped in this place, begging her to leave. But she couldn't. Not without understanding what had happened here, what evil had taken root in this forsaken house. Lena closed her eyes again, trying to push past the growing sense of dread. She needed to find the source of this darkness. As she ventured deeper into the house, she came to a narrow staircase, the wood creaking underfoot as she ascended. The air grew even colder, and she could see her breath in front of her, misting in the dim light. At the top of the stairs, there was a hallway lined with doors, each one closed, as if hiding something from view. Lena's pulse quickened. She knew instinctively that the source of the evil was at the end of the hall. She moved toward the last door, her hand trembling as she reached for the knob. The moment she touched it, the temperature in the hallway plummeted, and a deep growl reverberated through the walls, so low and guttural that it seemed to shake her very bones. "You should have left." The voice was louder now, more commanding, as though it were coming from every direction at once. Lena's heart hammered in her chest, but she refused to turn back. She had to see this through. With a swift motion, she turned the knob and pushed the door open. What she saw inside made her blood run cold. The room was empty, save for an ancient, dust-covered altar in the center. The walls were adorned with strange symbols, carved deeply into the stone, their meaning lost to time, but it was the altar that drew her attention. The bloodstains, still fresh despite the years of decay, were unmistakable. And on the floor in front of the altar was a figure, a man kneeling, his back arched unnaturally. His eyes were wide open, but they were completely black, no whites, no pupils, just endless voids. He was muttering something under his breath, his voice hoarse, like a chant, like an incantation. Lena's stomach churned. She could feel the presence now, something far darker than anything she had ever encountered before. This was no ordinary spirit. This was something ancient, something demonic. The figure on the floor lifted its head, and for the first time, Lena felt true terror. His mouth opened impossibly wide, stretching too far to be human, and a voice, no, a roar, ripped through the silence. "You have trespassed where you do not belong." Lena staggered back, her pulse pounding in her ears. She knew then, without a shadow of a doubt, that she had come face to face with something far beyond her understanding. And now, there was no escape. Lena stumbled back, her legs weak beneath her, as the monstrous roar echoed through the chamber. The figure on the altar continued its horrid chant, his voice twisting and distorting into something unrecognizable. She tried to steady herself, but the cold was overwhelming, seeping into her bones and spreading like ice through her veins. The demon's voice, low and guttural, filled the room. "You cannot escape. You are already mine." With every word, Lena felt her skin burn. The very air seemed to grow heavier, suffocating her. She tried to breathe, but it was as though the demon's presence had stolen the oxygen from the room. Panic gripped her chest, and she turned to flee, but the door slammed shut with an ear-splitting crack, trapping her in the room with the demon's growing wrath. "There is no escape, medium. You will serve me. Your soul will belong to me, and the spirits you speak to, they will scream your name in agony for eternity." Lena's thoughts raced, her training and experience trying to push through the terror. She knew that demons fed on fear, that their power was inextricably linked to the fear and despair of their victims. She closed her eyes, pushing the panic away, forcing herself to focus. She had faced spirits before, dark spirits, even vengeful ones. But this was different. This was no spirit. This was something far older, far more dangerous. She reached into her pocket and grabbed the amulet her grandmother had given her years ago. It was said to protect against dark forces, though Lena had never truly believed in its power, until now. She pressed the cold metal to her chest, feeling its weight, the faint vibrations that seemed to hum with ancient energy. But the demon's laughter echoed through her mind, mocking her attempts. "Your feeble charms mean nothing. You are weak. You will fall like the others before you." Before she could react, the demon's presence surged forward, overwhelming her senses. The ground seemed to shake, the walls groaning, as if the very structure of the house was bending to the demon's will. Lena cried out, stumbling backward, but it was too late. The force that surrounded her was suffocating. It took days for Lena to leave the house. When she returned to her small apartment, her body was trembling from exhaustion, her mind in a fog. The house had let her go, but it was not done with. She was still with her eyes open, watching, waiting. Every night, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. At times, she could hear the growl of the demon echoing through her walls, its voice a low, gnashing rumble that made the air feel thick with malice. She tried to sleep, but nightmares came. In every dream, the demon stood over her, its eyes filled with endless darkness, its mouth stretching wider than any human mouth should. It would lean in, its breath hot and foul against her skin. "You cannot hide. I will consume you." Lena knew that the battle was not over. The demon was relentless, and its hold on her was growing stronger. But she refused to give in. She would not let it win. She spent days in fear feverish haze, poring over ancient texts, seeking anything, any way, to defeat the demon once and for all. She reached out to other mediums, to mystics and exorcists, but no one had answers. The demon was beyond their understanding. Its power was too great. The days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, Lena felt herself weakening. Her energy drained, and she could barely summon the strength to face the day. The demon fed on her fear, her exhaustion, slowly breaking her down. It would visit her in her dreams, taunting her, showing her visions of what awaited her if she gave in, visions of her own death, her spirit trapped in eternal torment. But Lena refused to yield. One evening, in a moment of desperation, she gathered all her strength and returned to the house. She knew she had to confront the demon head-on. There would be no running from it. As she crossed the threshold of the house once again, the temperature dropped. The air was thick with dread, and the whispers seemed to swirl around her like a violent wind. The demon was waiting for her. It was there, in the room with the altar, that the final confrontation would unfold. Lena stepped into the room, her breath ragged and shallow. The altar was just as familiar, blood-stained, ancient, and desecrated. The figure on the floor was no longer kneeling. It was standing now, tall and imposing, the blackness of its eyes swallowing all light. The demon's form was shifting, an ever-changing mass of shadow and flame, its true nature hidden beneath layers of horror. "You return to me, medium?" The demon's voice boomed, shaking the very foundation of the house. Lena clenched her fists, her heart pounding in her chest. She had come prepared. She had studied the old rituals, the ancient rites that could bind a demon. She had prepared her body and spirit, filled herself with the strength of the earth, the air, the fire, and the water. She would not let it take her. "I will send you back," Lena whispered through gritted teeth. "You will not take me." The demon's laughter shook the room, a sound so chilling that it seemed to pierce the very fabric of reality. "You cannot banish me, Lena. I have existed long before your kind. Your power is nothing compared to mine." But Lena held her ground, closing her eyes and drawing on the energy of the amulet, the symbols, and the forgotten chants her grandmother had taught her. She began to chant, her voice steady despite the tremors of fear deep inside her. "By the light of the stars, by the wind of the skies, I bind you, darling, to your rightful place." The demon's form flickered, twisting in agony as Lena's words took hold. The shadows shrieked, hurling away from her as if trying to escape the force she was summoning. But the demon fought back, its power surging in violent waves, tearing at the walls, shaking the floor beneath her. "You cannot stop me! You are nothing!" But Lena's resolve did not waver. Her voice grew louder, stronger, the words flowing from her lips with a power she had never known she possessed. The demon's roar intensified, but it began to lose its form, the darkness ebbing away as the ritual took hold. With one final, desperate cry, the demon's presence flickered and collapsed. The room suddenly filled with silence. For a moment, Lena felt only emptiness, the kind of quiet that follows the end of a storm. But then, a whisper, "I will return." Lena froze, her heart racing. The voice was distant, fading, but its words were clear. The demon was gone, for now. She had won, but it was not over. She knew that, in time, it would return. Demons like this were not easily destroyed. They lingered, waiting for weakness, for the right moment to strike again. But for now, Lena had won the battle, and she would be ready. Weeks passed since the confrontation, and Lena returned to her life. The demon was gone, but the scars of the battle remained. She could still feel its presence, like a shadow always at the edge of her vision. At times, she would wake in the dead of night, the air thick with the unmistakable sensation of something watching her. And though she had won for now, Lena knew that this war was far from over. The demon would be back. It always came back. But as the days turned to weeks, Lena began to feel herself slipping away. The demon's power was too great. And then one cold evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she felt it. A cold hand on her shoulder. When she turned, she saw nothing but darkness. And she knew it was too late. Lena Morris had become another name, another voice, lost in the abyss. You've glimpsed into the abyss, but the darkness is never far. If you enjoyed the terror, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. There are many more nightmares waiting for you. Until next time, sleep with one eye open. The abyss is always watching.